right, so welcome. Thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. I think we have a very, very exciting panel, and we get the logistics right. We'll actually also get to play some games. It's really, really fun to do in a library, so very, very excited about that. Thank you all for joining us. The group that is sponsoring this is called Design in the DMV, and we're a group that really tries to lift up local designers here in the DC, Maryland, Virginia. I think you all know what the DMV is. Area, but whenever we're outside the area, people are always like, "Oh, you design games about the cars or whatever." So, and we have some amazing talent here. So one of the things we really try to do is showcase all the different talent here, and also encourage people to consider designing games yourselves. Because everybody can, and if that's something that you're interested in, please come chat with us, because that's something we're always encouraging, and we're here as a community to support that. So what we have today is we're going to have about 20-30 minutes panel chat. Then if everyone's a little bit patient and maybe you can help out, we're going to rearrange the room with tables, and we'll set up some games and get that going. And we have the room until 6. We have to be out of here before 6 because union rules, so we'll just comply with that.
Yes.
And with that, I was going to bring names. Okay, you know what? I'm not perfect. So why don't we go down the table here and have you just say your name without doxing yourself, your general location in the DMV, where you grew up as opposed to where you are now, and what your top non-gaming hobby might be.
I'm Elizabeth Hargrave. I live right here in Silver Spring. This is my home library. And I grew up in several places, but I really call Florida home, Gainesville, Florida. And I am a big birder and mushroomer, as you might guess.
You're also a shell collector? Are you a shell collector?
Oh, and a shell collector too, which we can talk about.
Hi there, I'm Josh Heath. I live in Laurel. I used to live here in Silver Spring when I first moved to Maryland. I'm originally from New Hampshire, but I've lived all around the world. The next question was a hobby outside of gaming. I am an amateur philosopher, which sounds way pretentious, and it's not at all meant to be. It's just I enjoy reading other people's thoughts on thought. So I guess that's the hobby, the non-gaming hobby that I've done.
My name is Angela Bell. I am originally from Birmingham. I moved here I live over in the College Park, Maryland area. I moved here in 1988 for a job, and I'm still here. My non-game hobby, I'm an avid traveler. I've traveled all 7 continents and almost 85 to 90 countries.
My name is Samphire Savage. I live in the Silver Spring area. I grew up in Western Europe, and I've lived all over the world. I travel extensively. My friends call me migratory because I tend to follow the same travel paths. I would say my biggest non-gaming hobby right now, though, I mean, like, what is a game, right? Like, if you LARP, does improv count as a hobby outside of gaming? I don't know, but improv and singing. And I just got back from a week-long Shakespeare residency where we put on an on-site location performance of Much Ado. I do not consider myself a theater kid, so I consider that a hobby, not a profession. Yeah.
I'm actually I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Gene Koo, and I'm here in Tacoma Park, not that far away as well, and grew up on Long Island, New York. And I don't know about hobbies, but what I do a lot is throw curveballs by accident, and I realized I just had you all introduce yourselves, but we're all here to talk about tabletop games, and so I didn't ask you about your tabletop games. So I think maybe for the next question, I have it all scripted out here, but before you answer the next question, just tell us about any of the games that you have designed, worked on, etc., that you're interested in sharing with folks today, and then let's dive into the questions. So why don't we do what is that when you go back and forth? Turn order? Snake?
Oh boy.
And then tell us about the types of games tell us about the games you create. specifically, and tell us a little bit about the types of experience that they create, who they're for, like what is the feelings that people have, who do you think play that game, who did you make it for when you made the game? I'm sorry. That's the problem with snake draft.
No, this is fine. Everything's fine. So I got into game design a couple of years ago through a really cool event called Political Hits, which is a sex educator, game designer, game jam ran by Planned Parenthood of the Midwest with the philosophy that sex education in this country is so bad that if you even make a mediocre sex ed game, you're elevating the level of sex ed in this country. And I very quickly, I've been surrounded by game designer friends since I moved to the DC area, and I didn't think myself a game designer. But that weekend a few years ago really solidified it for me. So somewhere out there, there's this game called The Gray Area that we made that weekend that is a decision-making game that's designed for high schoolers, and that was my inroad. I have a background in public policy, and I like to say that I love making games way more than doing public policy, because if I make a bad game, nobody dies, right?
Yeah.
Like the anxiety levels are much lower. The games I make, my design partner and I would say we design games for thoughtful togetherness. They're weird, they're sometimes a little bit witchy, and they're whatever is on our plate right now. So in last year, 23, we kickstarted a game called The Old Ways Must Go, which is a game that uses tarot, any tarot deck you have, to tell a story together about something that's gone wrong in your world or your community, and how to build a ritual or a celebration out of composting that thing. That, in the way many creative projects do, kind of extended and became a whole zine project around tarot for gaming and for conversations and using tarot in collaborative ways. I never thought I would be a tarot expert, but here we are. The two games I've been working on lately, we're in art direction for a game called Gorgon's Garden, which is, all the games I make are collaborative. It is a social deception game about thwarting Zeus's advances on mortals using innuendo. Right, can't take the sex educator out of me. It takes consent very, very seriously and power dynamics, but it's fun and silly at the same time. We're hoping to launch that this summer. I'm really excited by the artists we've got on this project. Like, they really get what we're doing. And then because I'm pretty serious too, I'm in late development on a game called White Space, which is a game about archival silence and narrative control, about how we decide what stories are true. And you literally deconstruct an existing story using a set of mechanisms, editing it over 5 generations, and rebuilding it, and then examining it and seeing what sense you could make of it. So it's sort of like literary archaeology, and super nerdy, and kind of sad, honestly. We also have made a couple of tiny games, including a sort of like another innuendo game called My Dear Lady's Disdain. You may recognize the Shakespeare quote in there. Conversational Shrapnel, which is a creativity starter, and something called Kirby Cryptids Roller Jam, which is a card game about roller derby and cryptids. So when I'm an odd starting point, right? Because I'm probably like on the scale of like what you'll find at a store to like deep weird. I'm deep weird over here.
Love it.
Welcome to the party.
That's a tough act to follow. I actually have released my first game last year. It's a game actually about the FBI. After 33 years, I retired in 2021 and didn't have the patience for a book about all of my experiences, so it turned into a card game. Released it in March of last year, and it's interesting because the idea came about during the insurrection, because a news reporter said an inaccurate statement about the FBI, and that kind of stayed with me. So I ultimately ended up making a card game that's kind of educational. You like vocabulary. If you watch the FBI shows or CSI and you hear all those acronyms, perfect game for you, right? You read the crime fiction novels, it's kind of like perfect for that as well. Originally, I made the game just so I could have something to hang out with my retired friends, because now I'm retired and I'm like, what do we do? You know, what do retired people do, right? So I didn't want to just sit still, so I made the game. Wasn't really sure I was going to release it because I'm like, everybody's sick of the FBI, right? So I ultimately played it with strangers at the spa and retired people. So ultimately I released it, and it's been very, very cool. So I don't have as many as she has, but it's been a very cool experience. For my very first time, it's not what I do for the FBI. I'm not a creative, I'm not a nerd, I can't draw a straight line, right? But I had no experience in this area and actually released it. We actually got an award this year, which was very kind of cool for a community. So it brings people together, families. It allows law enforcement to talk to their families about what they do in a fun kind of way. So it just kind of opens the door, and it hopefully demystifies things about the FBI that people didn't know.
Hard acts to follow on both. So I have been a long-time gamer, lifetime gamer. I got into gaming through live-action role-playing games, particularly Vampire the Masquerade and The World of Darkness. And then I went into the Army and continued to run role-playing games while I was deployed. Most particularly, I actually won an award for running games while I was in a deployed environment because it was a morale-boosting activity for people. And I got in the military to get out. I got in with the goal of getting the GI Bill and going to school, and I did so. I got my master's degree in international peace and conflict resolution because I've always been a hippie. And when I was in grad school, my plan was to go work for the UN, and one of my advisors said, "You would hate that. It would destroy your life." And I was like, you know what? Knowing what I know now, you're right. And so I instead started working on a project called Reach Out Role-Playing Games, which is a project designed to use tabletop role-playing games as a form of intercultural dialogue, because games get people to talk to each other. Particularly role-playing games, you get the opportunity to avatar yourself a little bit, where you can both, hopefully, understand other people's experiences and life backgrounds in a way that allows you to discuss those, but not necessarily have it be incredibly personal, right? You get to go a little bit back and forth when you play a role-playing game between how deeply invested I am into this identity, and then what does that mean to my real identity afterward, right? So many people, myself included, recognize their queerness within role-playing games, and the ability to, that in particular, I think is a great way of using games, right, to explore your own identity and how that intersects with the rest of the things you do in your world, in your life in the world, right? Since then, I've mostly produced community content, and I've produced about 160 community content role-playing game supplements. And what community content is you're using someone else's intellectual property and you're writing a supplement for their game. I've created my own games as well, but the ability to create community content is one of those ones that I encourage people to start with, because it's an opportunity to write for a game you may already know, a world you already may know. It's a bit like fan fiction, but cooler. Not in any way dispersing fan fiction. It's cooler because you get to make some money off of it. You know, which is nice. Recently, I've been working to help other creators create their games. We helped a creator called Neil Litherland with his game Army Men, where you play plastic army people in a plastic army world. And it's designed to be somewhere between satire and serious, right? You can play it as you're a serious squad of soldiers who are doing serious soldiering, or you're plastic people in someone's backyard who, well, are you Toy Story or are you not, right? It allows you to do a little bit of both of those depending on how seriously you want to take it. But my most recent game that is actually going on Kickstarter on Tuesday is a game called May I Enter? May I Enter, a vampire game? And the idea for this game came from me being uncomfortable with the fact that vampires are kind of, they are salty, right? When they harm people in the process of taking their blood, right? And we we romanticize that to some degree, and that's a little made me more and more uncomfortable the more and more I dealt with that as a concept, right? And so ultimately I decided, well, what if vampires had to have consent? What would that look like, right? What would the world of vampires look like if they actually had to have active consent to feed on a person? So May I Enter is about active consent. It has a lot of deep lore about vampires. Our vampires were bound in a magical ritual cast by Helen of Troy in the Trojan War. Helen's a vampire too. And that ritual has caused all vampires to be bound by the various mythological restrictions that vampires have. And the one we added was they have to have permission to feed. And so you as a vampire are dealing with having to have all of these deep emotional relationships with human beings because those relationships allow you access to your powers. But then you're dealing with the loss and the horror of those people live and then they die. And you can't continue that beyond their lives because that goes against this magical ritual that you have been bound by. So again, just to self-promote for 2 seconds, it'll be on Kickstarter on Tuesday. I'm very excited about it. And I think it speaks to some of what Samphire was talking about, those opportunities that games give you to talk about difficult topics for some people, right? And consent is one of those that's a weird one, right? It's one of those ones we believe, a lot of people believe strongly in, more people should believe strongly in. And how do you practice getting active consent, right? How do you do that in a way that's safe? And I think role-playing games are a great opportunity for that. So.
I design strategy board games mostly with nature themes. It just happened that way. My most well-known one is Wingspan. The most recent one is Undergrove. I have one coming out next year called Sanibel that will be about collecting seashells on the beach on Sanibel Island.
I think you're hearing from this also. We put this panel together very intentionally to just reflect a huge diversity of what games can be, different approaches to games, different approaches to publishing games, from big mainstream publishers to self-publishing to all sorts of different ways to do things. So again, what we're really just trying to show is how many different ways you can design games. And if you don't mind, actually, I'm really curious about this. If you're not too embarrassed to do so, if any of you are interested in actually designing games yourselves, could you? Cool. All right. Yeah. Great. Well, we definitely can talk about that a little bit too. Maybe we're going to have time to talk after the panel. So we're really here to encourage building a community around our love of games and our love of designing games.
Hey, Gene, can we also ask if anybody here has been designing or designed a game?
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
All right,
Amazing.
there we go. There we go.
Yeah.
That's a great question. Yeah, very, very happy to talk about that because there's actually an incredible amount of resources in this area supporting game designers. It's quite impressive. Can you tell, we're going to do the snake draft and go back to you, Elizabeth, tell us a little bit about what influences your game design approach that outside of games. Like what might inspire you, or what do you draw from when you think about the systems in your games, things like that, but not necessarily from the games themselves, from other games.
Yeah, I mean, so most of my game ideas come from something in the world that I want to share with people, or that I think people will think is cool once they know about it. And that often directly leads into how the game should work, right? A game about monarch butterflies migrating between Mexico and Canada should clearly have a map in it that you're moving butterflies on. And what else do I draw on? I don't know. So it's a combination, I think, of just having played a lot of games, which I think is important for designers to be familiar with what's out there and sort of get steeped in all the ways that games can work. And then also having hobbies outside of gaming that I draw on for inspiration and for ideas just about how systems work in the world that you can then build game systems out of.
Okay, that was a good answer. Okay. For me, I got into game design very intentionally, right? Like for me, it was an opportunity to do the intercultural dialogue stuff. So that kind of infuses all of my game design. My intent is to get people to talk to each other in one form or another, and often using silly premises to do so, right? Like Army Men is a silly premise. It's something you can just laugh at, but then you're like, well, what does it mean for us to be a green army man versus a red army man and be allied and working together against this common enemy, right? And this is an opportunity for that conversation that is always a thing I go to, a thing I try to root back to into my game design. I think like Elizabeth said, you, as a designer, you either should play as many games as you can or don't play any game at all. Because the cooler things to me are the people who are like, I'm going to make a game and have never played Monopoly. Set you up, Angela. But you can learn so much from either one of these two directions, right? You can't really be in the middle. If you played a couple of different games and you make your game, all right, that's cool. But I think it's awesome to like, if you're like, I've played maybe one or two, I'm going to design something, and maybe it mimics other things. That's okay. That is a great place to start, is to mimic something you already know. Army Men uses the 5th edition D&D rule set as its baseline. We have my Enter game uses Powered by the Apocalypse, which is another pretty popular game system. It's more like a game framework, because you have to bespoke everything in it anyway. People are like, oh, my game's powered by the apocalypse, and I'm like, that means nothing. You know, it's a theme more than it is an actual system. But that is a great way to get started. Start with a thing that you're already familiar with, and then make it different. Or come in and just be like, you know what, I've got this cool idea about the way dice or cards or whatever it is that you want to design could work. Game mechanics is a vague term. It doesn't mean anything. A mechanic in a game is just a thing you are doing that helps the activity occur. That's my terrible definition. Anyway, I'm talking too much, so Angela, you want to pick up from there?
I didn't play games at all. I played Uno. That was my jam. Uno was like my jam, right? So when I decided to make a card game, I had no idea like where to start, what to do, or how do you make it. So I started writing questions down from all of the questions that people generally would call the FBI and ask us, right? So I started there. Okay, of course we got to have some Silence of the Lamb, right? We got to have some X-Files. We got to have the FBI and pop culture. And then I'm like, okay, well, it should have an educational component. It should have a trivia component. Look, what about all of these different components here? So I'm calling all friends, hey, asking questions, and they're triggering me thinking about all of the cases that I've been involved in over the last 33 years. I go to the dollar store. I don't draw a straight line, right? I go to the dollar store, buy some cards, I cut and paste. And that became my tester kit, right? I would take those cards everywhere and how people played them. But I didn't have an idea of what the game should look like. I knew they were going to be cards. And I was like, okay, we're going to have some cards. How many? I started with 150. Ultimately, the box has 500. Clearly, I was on a roll, right? So I just kind of like, then I said, okay, I'm back and forth with the FBI. They said, hey, you can use the name. But I couldn't trademark it. And trademarking was important to me because I'm like, hey, I put in all this time and all this money and work. I want to be able to protect the game. So I opted not to use the FBI in the title. So then I said, when you look at the box, I want you to do no FBI. So then I used images on the box. But me trying to explain that to the graphic designer was funny because, again, I'm creative, but I can't, So I used that and I stood in Target hours in Target. I mean, they should have hired me at Target because I stayed there. I'm looking at all of the boxes. I'm looking at all of the images, all of the icons and logos, saying, should I have that? Does CE apply here in the US or is it only in Europe? So it was a lot of research, it was a lot of Reddit, and it was a lot of YouTube videos on just how to do it. In addition to hey, you gotta make a company. On top of creating this game, you have to figure out how to have a company, how to trademark it. I had a big learning curve because that is not what I did for the FBI. for 33 years, out of college, straight to the FBI. So it's like, oh, now I'm doing something totally different than what I was familiar with. I play Uno, right? And here I am, who am I to make a card game? So I start thinking of the educational component, how the FBI could use it internally, how the retirees, when they got together, they can reminisce over their shared experience, right? The law enforcement officers can talk about with their family members what they do every day without really talking about child porn, right? You know, the crime con folks. It was so many different people I thought could have fun with it or enjoy it or have an education but be entertaining at the same time. So I kind of, you know, just said, oh, this is what we're going to do. And I said, give me some images like this. This is what most people think of when they think of the FBI. Let's put that on the box and let's come up with something. Maybe some fingerprints, and we need some of this and some of that. And it turned out great. So.
I think I want to answer this question two ways, which is you asked about influences, but I also want to think about instigators, right? Because everybody has an idea, but what actually got me over the threshold to make something. I was recently at a board game judging event called the Cardboard Edison, and somebody had read my little lark that I made. It's called Rule of Three. And one of the core premises in it is that there is this drop-in, drop-out mechanism. I wrote this game for a contest last year. And one of the things the contest wanted was games that parents could join and children could be part of, and that they could drop in and out of in order to meet their kids' needs. And I'm like, oh, I'll just actually put down what I did when I created sort of like in the woods LARP for my kid when he was 10. But when I was at this judging weekend, somebody who had read it said, you know what I think is really beautiful about this is that it really makes space for like families that have lost a child. And I started bawling because I lost a kid 8 years ago, right? And I didn't even realize that I had created a space for my own narrative in this game. And so when you think about influences, like there's the really top level thing where I can say that like my experience with improv and my ability to yes and things is a great influence in what I do, or I can tell you a bit about my lived experience. But when it comes to instigating the work, I think of a couple of things. And one is that like creativity really loves constraints. And so a good idea is a great starting point as long as you don't feel like you're wedded to it. Our game about thwarting Zeus advances came from a friend saying, what if we made an Untitled Zeus game? If you've ever played Untitled Goose Game, that was where it started. Yeah. Right? 6 months later, it is a very different thing than it started of, because as we started to think about what this game would be, it is not the kind of silly thing that Untitled Goose is, right? It took a whole nother direction. It went really deep into the law, or it allowed us to influence it in that way. Really, my influences have been my frustrations with not seeing myself or my interests in game worlds. I started playing Magic the Gathering in 1994, right? Like I was like 13 and someone handed me a deck of cards. I have no idea what I was doing or why. And I dropped out in 1998 because it became full of people who didn't look or act like me. I wanted collaborative games. I wanted thoughtful games. I wanted games that made people feel in really safe ways, right? So have big feelings, but also a really strong container for those feelings. And I wanted to make sure, and I still experience this, it's less now, but as I walked through gaming spaces, people could see people like me and see things that interested them. And in a world where there is still the entrance into games is usually competitive games, or ones that have like a neat little nesting of strategy where you can win through many conditions. It's one of the reasons I love Wingspan and Undergrove. I wanted to do ones that were really just ways to bring people together and for them to like, I don't know, be better because of it. I don't know, can't take the activist out of me, so I guess that ends with influence as well, right?
Awesome. This is actually one of several events that we've done together that are at a location that's actually book-centered. We've done bookstores and libraries, so I'd want to throw this one quickly out at the audience. It's not really much of a game, but it's a survey of a kind. Can you raise your hand, and the height of your hand tells us how much you're into it, is like, raise your hand about how much you're into books. Like read books all the time, and I don't read books at all. Okay. And then how about like TV and movies, YouTube videos and TikTok, just listening to music? All right, and then I'm really curious about this one, tabletop games. Video games. Sports. Those are all games. Thank you. It really is. That's a setup for this next question, and we'll come right back this direction again, which is, how do you think of games as a medium, and why games and not TikTok videos, or maybe you do TikTok videos, I don't want to assume, or write a book, or write a play, screenplay, etc. Why games? Why is that your jam?
Oh my gosh. As a multimedia artist, right, I've done everything from build like 30-foot tall art installations to, you heard the theater bit, to like publish stories and other things. I love designing games for a couple of reasons, right? Like if you go back to when I was a kid, like choose your own adventure stories, right? There's this participatory piece of games that is there in a bunch of other mediums, but that is central to a game, right? If you're designing a storytelling game of any sort, there's also this sort of like, you're putting your mind out there and you're allowing someone to engage with your story and then trusting that they're gonna do something interesting with it. So it's sort of like, as a parent who's raised kids to adulthood, it's sort of like the ability to take this creative piece and like let it go out into the world and be what it's going to be, while also trying to figure out, like, my policy grid is always like, how do I sort of like create the bumpers that keep people in it? I think they nest really well together. It's very common that once you make a game and it's successful, there's like, well, let's do a story collection, and we're doing one for Old Ways soon. We're actually doing a writing workshop where we're going to use that as a bunch of writing prompts. But I think that when you have an idea, one of the ways that supports creativity is to not get caught up in deciding what the final form of that idea is going to look like when you start. You might think it's an idea for a game. We had one that was a game pitch that was an excess of pomegranates, and it's actually becoming an erotic cookbook that someone's writing, right? because the recipe blog format is an underappreciated art form that is being misapplied, right? Like, nobody wants all of that content, but what if you could have erotic short stories that then had a how-to at the end, right? So that's a group project that got seeded in what we thought was going to be a game. Right, so if you're willing to reimagine any idea, and if you get stuck, change the frame, right? Change the medium, and play with it for a while. You might find your way back to it eventually, or it might become something else. And I think that's just a really beautiful, permissive space. So, yeah.
I think a game, because the attention span of kids now is very short. Very, very short. Or not just kids, but just everyone. And it allows you to sit down and actually have a conversation. It allows for interaction. It allows for discussion. And in my world, you know, as a person who's talked for a living, right? It's like people don't talk anymore, and I'm like, how did I get here, right? When they pay me to talk for an agency, and now I don't talk to anyone. When no one talks, everybody's on their phone. So I thought the card game would be a great way for people to actually sit down, have a conversation, interact with each other, have a discussion, and it just kind of, I thought, brought people together more so than anything. Food, beverages, and good time.
Yeah, I think that's where I was going to start too, is games get people together, right? Games get people talking to each other, particularly tabletop role-playing games. There are absolutely solo games out there that are absolutely delightful, do not get me wrong, but generally role-playing games require people, and it's one of those things when you're like, oh, you're such a nerd, it's a nerdy hobby, and I'm like, yes, I'm as social as you get for a nerd. And for me, I'm such an incredible introvert that I need a game often to get me to talk to other people, to engage with other people. I love people, right, but also you exhaust me. And so, like, just taking that honestly is like, games are a way for me to step aside for a moment and be like, I have an activity, I'm going to enjoy doing this, and I get to interact with people and build those relationships. So it's a natural sort of outlet. But that's just one part. The other reason that I think games, in particular role-playing games for me, is because one of the first books I ever remember reading as a kid were the Chronicles of Amber by Roger Zelazny. And now, they're not perfect. They were written in the 60s and 70s, and you can tell. But he wasn't terrible. All the time. But one of the cool things in those books was the idea of alternate realities. The main characters can walk through what they call shadow. I'm literally re-listening to them right now, so it's top of mind. But the idea that they can walk throughout the universe and go to any world they wanted to and experience anything that they wanted to, that's what role-playing games let you do. It's what games let you do, is experience another reality for a little while. Learn something new. Be in a different space. Do something different. Traveling, all those things in this real world, going out and doing different things are amazing. But there's only so much that you can physically do in our world, right? For all the different reasons that we are constrained by reality, games let you not be restrained by reality. So the opportunity to be social and the opportunity to experience something different, I think that's why games are the choice rather than writing a novel, which is cool. Don't get me wrong, I'm bad at it, done it. But writing a game, playing a game, gives you those opportunities.
Yes to all of that. I've been getting into a philosopher named C.T. Nguyen, who has a book called Games Agency as Art. But I even more highly recommend, there's a couple of interviews with him out on the internet if you can track one of them down. He's just a super dynamic speaker, so that's even more fun than reading philosophy. But so his concept of agency as the medium of games, like you are creating a structure of decisions that people have to make, and you know, part of the pleasure of playing games is making interesting decisions, often within a context of some world that you wouldn't normally get to experience. And I just find it super interesting to think about that being what the actual medium is that we're working with, is crafting those decision spaces.
All right, I'm going to do a quick lightning round, which is, what is an underexplored area for games?
They do popcorn, I don't think that's...
Yeah. All right. Actually, anyone, including the audience, jump in. What is an underexplored area for games? Anyone?
I think a lot of cultures that don't get representation and showcasing those cultural aspects of parts of the world that we don't see, and showcasing them through the lens of those people so they get the representation that they deserve.
I think this is something where video games are much further ahead than TTRPGs on, and there are some TTRPGs that have this, but the ability to kind of make something like a magic system that is cooperative, where you are constantly building pieces up into a spell or an effect in a way that is structured and doesn't because a lot of the examples that I've seen of this are mostly just very kind of vague, and everyone comes up with ideas, and that's also great, but having structure that is also cooperative and having a lot of frameworks for it is something I haven't seen a lot of.
So I think it's really important, especially as we are in a world in which carceral systems are more and more dominating, that we think about including people who are incarcerated in making games accessible. And if you do not have friends or have a connection to that world, oftentimes that means that you cannot have dice in your game, you can have juvenile material, no hardcovers. There's a really cool organization called bullpress.org, that is focused on making games that can be played, tabletop RPG, storytelling games for prison systems. And as a set of constraints, I think it's really interesting. We all like the clickety-clackety, but also we're more and more being touched by the influence of people being in restrictive settings. And if we can design for inclusion in those spaces, then I think we can really lift up the world of game design in particular. And I know that games have saved the life of some of my friends who've been incarcerated. Yeah.
think going in a different direction. There's something in my head about more physicality in storytelling games, right? Like there are some LARPs that let you do things, but it would be really interesting to me to have a sports ball kind of game that also includes some form of storytelling, right? Like I have no idea what that would look like, but like baseball that has a story, right? Soccer that has a story, there's things that could be done there that would be interesting. Maybe like a capture the flag type of LARP that, I don't know. It's just an idea that there's some form of physicality in a storytelling game that would be interesting to me.
Can I really quickly ask you one question? Are you familiar with the system Dread?
Dread, yes. So Dread is awesome because for those that don't know, you have a Jenga tower or a non-trademarked tower of blocks that you take apart, and as you do so, it builds literal physical tension at the table because you're sitting there going, I don't want the tower to fall. And then eventually the tower falls, right, and all that tension is released. And it creates this very visceral, physical reaction of going from tension storytelling to tension faded, right? It's that laughter in a horror movie. Dread is amazing. It's one of my favorite games because it does all of that sort of stuff.
I think we also need more games that are really truly for all ages. I think oftentimes we see the all ages tag and it means children's games. And I think that really takes away from the agency and brilliance of young people. And designing games that are inclusive of say, a grandparent and a grandchild, and the span between it that really bring families together, which typically means like low literacy and high interest, right? Like I think that is the true challenge of making an interesting game is can a 6-year-old and an 85-year-old play it together and both want to come back to the table again and again and do it.
One of the things I love doing is encouraging creativity in games, and in that actually to take what you said is reversing the often power dynamics, because I often find it's the kids who are least inhibited and most creative, and then the adults have something to learn from the kids as far as like letting go of their self-judgment about their own creativity.
Yeah.
There was a hand. Yeah.
So I'm also a designer, and I had a friend recently. You reminded me on the accessibility subject. I have a friend who has gone from partially blind to completely blind within the last few months. And she called me recently and said, can you design a game that is playable by a completely blind person? And actually, can you recommend a game? And I realized I can't think of anything for her except for, I offered her Mancala. Mancala, I think, is a game that you can play as a completely blind person. But I think that's a really interesting subject because you don't have color, you don't have text. She told me no one really uses Braille anymore. So that's not really an option, and so trying to come up with a game that she can enjoy without needing a sighted person there to say like, oh yeah, that's a red piece or something like that.
So track down the game Nyctophobia.
Nyctophobia?
Which was created by someone to play with her blind uncle. And you can play it, if you have sight, you put on like an eye mask. And so you're like in a haunted forest or something. If there's an axe murderer, I think there might be different scenarios. But so like you can't see because it's a dark forest. Is the premise of it, and you're moving physical pieces around on the board.
To piggyback on that, like accessibility in design, there are conventions in game design that are designed to include the most people possible, so please use them. Card layout designs, color schemes, things like that. There's a great place for creativity, and there's also a great place for actually looking at what the standards are that have been designed for inclusion. I'm really big on accessibility as a person with disabilities myself, and one of my favorite improv workshops to run with all ages is a workshop called Duck Duck Octopus, where we take the game Duck Duck Goose, and everybody who's there brings in their own challenge around access to games, and we start an iterative process of redesigning the game Duck Duck Goose until it includes everyone in the room and everything that they've thought of. And what it is it's really a permission space because your game is probably accessible, just that when people are first said, I can't play this game the way it's made, people freeze up and they don't know what to do. So it's an improv workshop more than an accessibility workshop because it gives people the permission to actually throw the ball back and forth with the person and the other people in the room to help imagine how your existing game can be more inclusive. So
Okay.
I want to add one more thing, but for the visually impaired at least. There is a company that is about to kickstart a project to make audiobooks for a bunch of different role-playing games, which to me has been like the gold star for years. I'm like, one, I'm an audiobook person these days because of how my life is, and two, I will be going slowly, more and more visually impaired as the time goes on, so I'm very excited about that. The option for audiobooks and role-playing games. There's also an organization called Dots RPG that produces textured dice that are designed specifically for people who have sight difficulties. So those are great. They're a great resource. And in general, I'd say role-playing games are a great opportunity for people with visual impairments. But.
All right, since we're closing on the end of the hour, so just one last question for folks, especially given the interest in the room, is especially for folks who are thinking about designing games but haven't started, what's one piece of advice you might have? We can do popcorn, or we can do.
I mean, my always, yeah, just make it. Like, you know exactly as much about game design as I did when I started working on Wingspan. Maybe more.
I'd say outline. Like, outlining is your friend. Outline anything, even if it's just a dumb idea. You're like, this will have no bearing on my game and become a new game, right? Take notes, outline. It can be however you take notes.
Share your game early in the process. No earlier than that, no earlier than even that. Like, everyone's got an idea for a game, where a game actually, almost all creative projects are collaborative projects. And as Jean mentioned at the beginning, there's a huge and supportive community in the DMV to elevate and support new and existing game designers. There's things like Break My Game, there's TN Design that we do, which is just a casual meetup. There's people who will happily look at your thing, but your idea is worthless until it's tested against other people, especially if it's a game, because you can't always be running, maybe you can, but games are designed to be run by someone other than you. So until you bring your idea out and you give it to someone for feedback, it's just an idea. So the sooner you start with that, the better. Feedback loops are so good. It will only improve your game.
I will say research again, then plan, and then research again. Because there's so many things that you need to know that you don't realize that you don't know. And you don't find out until you get into it. I self-published, so I had to learn everything, right? So you have to, create a cheat sheet for how many fees you're going to have to pay. The bank, Amazon, for someone to pick up your game and put it in a box and someone to mail it. So I think you have to I created like a checklist between all of the Reddit posts I read, all of the YouTube videos. I created like a list of all of the things that I thought needed to happen. And that's what motivated me to kind of move forward, to figure out how to do it. Because there weren't any mentors that I could find to say, this is what you need to do. This is how you do it. I didn't know that Unpub, which is a group of folks who will test your game, they were right down the street in Baltimore, right? So, it's a lot of, that's when I say research. You have to research to figure out what's out there. How does the industry work? I made my game and then went and found the industry, which, I kind of did it as backwards, but, I definitely say research and just try to figure out, like, what do you want? What market do you want? Who is the game for? How much is it going to cost you to put the game out there? How many copies you should make? Because if you make too many copies, then you got to pay all of the storage fees. You got to pay monthly fees for everything and fees, and you're going to pay a fee to breathe. So it's just like all of these things. I would say just research.
And I would say if all of that scares you, then also know that you can just start making a game and plan on selling it to a publisher instead of putting it out into the world yourself.
which I didn't know you could do, right? I didn't know I could do that. So had I known Elizabeth then, I would have taken that path. I might have a little bit more money right now.
All right, so as we close out, I want to do a little bit of self or group promo. There's a little placard over there with the QR code for signing up for an email list. It's a very high content, low other stuff, like just listing of events in the local area that feature local game designers. So it's not all the gaming events, it's the events that have game designers involved. People have already alluded to a couple of other groups, and I think any of us would be happy to chat with you about that. The Design and the DM group itself has like a bi-weekly meetup that's mostly focused on role-playing games, so it's kind of diversified a little bit. There's Break by Game that has 4 locations in the DMV area. There's 2 here in Maryland, 1 in DC, 1.5 in Virginia. Depends on one of them's kind of being reorganized, but that's a lot. And that's like basically every month an opportunity to take any game idea you have and play test it. And as Andrew alluded to, there's another organization called Unpub, which is a national/international group, and it just so happens to meet the annual conference happens to be right here right at BWI. So like people like some of the most renowned game designers out there like come every year and bring their game designs, and you can too. Like it's open, everybody's equal, and everyone can bring their own game design. So there's so many resources for people who are either interested in designing games, and also for us weirdos like me who like to play unpublished games. Because for me, I love to see like the core idea and the thesis of the game before it's been all polished down by the publisher. So like I love playing the unpublished games, and if you like that, then we are always so grateful for people to come and test out our weirdo games. So all of those are resources available here. If you sign up for the newsletter about once a month, I'll just let you know like what's going on, and hopefully you can come to more events like this. And with that, I wanted to thank, I don't know if anybody's here from the library right now, but I wanted to thank the library for hosting us today. Thank all of you for coming.